It was a man named Ferenzi Jones who told me about the lodge. I can't remember everything we talked about that night, but the name sticks with me because it was this oddly sophisticated first name with that bland, average Joe surname tacked on the end. He sure as hell didn't look like a Ferenzi either. Not that I would have a clue what specifically would just scream a name like that. I don't know, maybe some 50s looking mob guy with a pencil-thin mustache and violin case that most definitely doesn't contain a violin. Not this man though. He came off more like the friendly backwoods country boy type. He was a short and skinny guy wearing stained overalls with one button missing so the left strap just drooped lifelessly, looking like he just walked off the set of some mishmash of country 90s hip-hop video. The torn black and baggy t-shirt underneath was just as stained as the denim, with heavy combat boots on his feet, one of which had his pant leg tucked inside. He looked maybe in his mid-40s with messy, dirty blonde hair, a shaggy beard, and a dark tan, making his skin almost resemble my old worn-out leather couch. He was a friendly sort, just talking to anyone who would listen to him at the bar, but I could tell right away that he was the type with many a tall tale to tell. The bartender, a tall, somewhat intimidating-looking stocky woman who looked like she may have a side gig in the UFC, just rolled her eyes at the man she called Jonesy. She had that no-nonsense, don't-waste-my-time sort of voice, and seemed to be quickly losing her patience with the blabbering man. I had been frequenting Tom's place, the pleasant local bar, for a while now, and I'd seen her snatch some poor bastard by the neck, dragging him to the door and tossing him out into the street like a garbage bag on more than one occasion. Jonesy seemed like a bit of an attention seeker, but being a writer, I had picked the brain of the occasional fellow patron or three, so I decided to buy the guy a drink before he got himself ejected from the place. Jane Colby, the intimidating bartender, gave me a rare smile of gratitude when I ushered the guy to my table with a pint in each hand. Though I was quite prepared not to believe a single word Ferenzi said, he had that uncanny ability to spin a well-crafted yarn. I thought that he, or perhaps some of his experiences, could make some fun inspiration, so we talked back and forth for a good while that night. With wide eyes and an enthusiastic tone in his voice, he told me about everything from the family of ghosts who used to haunt his childhood home, to his theories on what the government was hiding about the Phoenix Lights. Yes, every damn word he spoke was layered in 50 shades of bullshit, but I was quite honestly impressed by the creativity of the man. I asked him if he would mind if I took some inspiration from his stories, to which he lit up like a prom queen getting rewarded with a plastic tiara for popularity. As we began to part ways for the night, the drink and the lateness of the hour taking its toll on my weary bones, he spoke the words that fueled my curiosity more than anything else he told me that night. "You want to write something real good, you should look into the Last Lodge." I had already stood up, paid my tab, thrown my jacket on, and that sentence froze me in my tracks. There was something eerily familiar about it, like I'd heard it before. Not just the name of the place, but the exact sequence of words he spoke. It was the most potent instance of deja vu I've ever experienced. The Last Lodge? I asked, more to myself than the man who still nursed that last half of his fourth pint. "Yep, been there myself. Folks say that once you go in, ain't no coming out, but I did." Where have I heard that before? I asked myself. Reckon just about everybody's heard of it, I guess, just don't know it, you know? Jonesy said, his voice dropping to a far more melancholy tone than it had since we met. When I turned back to face him, his eyes were fixed on his glass as he swirled around its contents. While he had been bubbling over with enthusiasm throughout every tale he spun that night, there was no energy behind that distant gaze into his beer. "I'll look into that," I said, turning back towards the exit. "You ain't gonna find it on no interwebs," he said, his voice maintaining its lifeless croak. "You'll see the clues, though, now that it's on your mind." As I pushed through the door, making my way out into the night, one final statement almost whispered from the mouth of Ferenzi Jones. "I'm sorry, partner." When I awoke the next day to a throbbing head and bubbling stomach, my foggy brain hid away almost everything we discussed at the bar, aside from that last topic of conversation. Those last few words lingered heavily on my mind as I nursed some hot tea and forced some breakfast into my churning gut. Once the nausea subsided enough, I began my search for answers to the mysterious lodge. As Jonesy has said, I could find nothing online other than some bed and breakfast or rehab options. That was until I reached page 17 of my inquiry. About 8 or 9 results down, I almost didn't notice the headline of the article at first, given my still thumping head and my growing steadily more skeptical about the search yielding results. "The Lodge is waiting," the title read. The text wasn't any different from any of the other results on the page, but I swear I felt a shiver at the base of my neck when I noticed it. Likely, it was nothing more than the hangover combined with the excitement of my search finally leading somewhere, but it was short-lived at best. As soon as my slightly trembling fingers led the cursor over the bold text, my computer crashed. Well, not right away. The screen flickered and flashed with a collage of imagery my eyes didn't have time to register, filling the screen before it went blank. All I could make out was a red glow blinking into darkness. My laptop is a good 5 or 6 years old, so it's not like this was the first time it freaked out, but the timing wasn't great. When I finally got the damn thing booted back up, panning through my history to see no trace of the link I clicked on before the lights went out, my muddled brain shot a slew of very interesting slurs and curses to my mouth. As I attempted to begin my search again, hoping that page 17 would show me the same results, I can't say I was exactly surprised when it came up short. I tried a few more searches, even down to the precise wording of the link I found before my laptop crapped out, but ultimately I would end up admitting defeat. Perhaps it was as Jonesy said, that I wouldn't find it on no interwebs after all. Over the next few days, I tried to push the thoughts of this mysterious lodge into the back of my mind. While I can't say it was exactly successful, I did manage to get back into my normal routine, only allowing my mind to drift on occasion. As days became weeks, the festering obsession dissipated. Not completely, mind you, but I thought about it less and less, shifting my focus to other things. It was a boring Saturday as I strolled the streets of my small town in search of inspiration that I would once more find that lingering thought springing to the surface again. I'd never noticed the small, dingy-looking back alley bookstore before, but I was often prone to having my head in the clouds while aimlessly wandering. I creeped open the door, jingling the tarnished bell hanging above, my nostrils breathing in the scent of centuries-old pages. From the outside, the place looked as though asbestos would likely be hanging from cracked and weathered ceiling tiles within. It was actually quite pleasant inside. It almost felt more like an ancient library than some random used book peddler with rows upon rows of tall shelves revealing an almost endless stream of many colors of spines of books upon them. The warm lights above cast strangely ominous shadows across the marble floor, while not even the ambient humming of any air conditioner seemed to interrupt the silence. My footsteps practically echoed through the surprisingly large interior as I paced from one row to the next, a small smile creeping across my face. There was a bizarre sense of nostalgia as I strolled around from one aisle to the next. I saw no sign of any other patron nor any shop owner or employees. It felt like I was alone in the building, which began to make me wonder if I had somehow intruded. I can't say if I paid any attention to any sign in the window assuring me that the shop was open, but with the door freely opening, I had no reason to question it. Still, the longer I walked on as the lone traveler, the more uncomfortable I began to feel about it. I had just about convinced myself to head back to the door when the bold scarlet text caught my eye. "The Lodge is waiting," read the spine of the thick novel directly ahead of me on the third from the bottom of a tall bookshelf. I just stood there for what felt like minutes, gazing at the mysterious thing. Had it not been the fact that this was the exact same text as the results of my internet search, I may not have been so perplexed at the time. But what are the odds? While I'd been casually running my eyes across the titles of many of the books I passed by, I can't say if I fully registered any of those unfamiliar to me. What are the odds that the first book I fully focus on was this one? "You have remarkable taste," a deep and sophisticated-sounding voice spoke from my left. Not only was I unaware of when I closed into the shelf and pulled the book from it, but I didn't even hear the slender elderly man walk up. He looked to be pushing 70 at least, but stood upright and proud, with his hands behind his back. The neatly pressed white shirt, tie, and black vest combo he wore looked more suited to a fancy restaurant than a back alley bookshop, but the guy looked to be one of expensive taste. Though his face was weathered and wrinkled, decades upon decades of life etched into his sallow cheeks, his eyes looked somehow far more youthful than the rest of him. His thin lips peeled back into a wide smile beneath the thick white mustache that matched the far thinner hair on his head as his gaze blinked from the book I held to my almost bewildered expression. "That's a first edition, you know," he said, gently pulling the novel from my hand. "Only a handful of the originals even exist anymore." He unfolded the dust cover, gesturing with a long and bony finger to the number etched into the lower left corner. 17 of 42, it read, which assured me that this would be likely quite the pricey purchase should I choose to take the plunge. Maybe it's just the curse of the creative mind or the inherent skeptic I could be, but I halfway wondered if this was all part of an elaborate scam. For all I knew, there could be numbers upon every book in here, lurking under the dust jacket to milk every potential penny from the curious readers who may enter. While my curiosity was almost causing my mouth to water, I wasn't about to get ripped off over something like this. If I found the book here, I could surely track it down elsewhere now that I knew it existed. I had just about made my mind to bid farewell to the old con artist set to browse eBay as soon as I was out of his sight, when my suspicions were proved to be quite exaggerated. "How does $30 sound?" he asked, still wearing that oddly mischievous grin. Whether he had somehow delved into my mind, understanding that I was set to walk away without granting him a sale, or if this was the going rate for this book, I wasn't about to argue. The corners were worn, the pages yellowed and wrinkled, and even the dust jacket had some scuffs and scrapes, but it's the blemishes that only made it more beautiful to me. My gramps used to say that it's the scars that tell our stories. You meet someone with baby-smooth skin and not a hint of damage in sight, they likely have nothing interesting to share. The man sitting in the corner of the bar with the jagged scar across his cheek and one missing eye? Yeah, that guy's got a story to tell. While I was tempted to pull the book from the brown paper bag and flip through its pages the second I left the shop, my legs were practically begging me to find a place to sit down for a few. By the time I reached the restaurant just a block or two from the bookstore, my anticipation was boiling over as much as my desire to fill my belly. The Blue Moon is quite the fancy place for this small-town main street, but one I had grown a fondness for over the years I lived here. It's no more expensive than the average sports bar and grill, but it's the feel and the mood of the place that I fell in love with the first time I pushed through the double doors. The wide dining area is dimly lit with hardwood floors and lamps on each table should any patron desire a little more light. Booths lined the walls, each with tall borders between to allow a measure of privacy that many other such places don't. The bar at the rear had tall, high-backed stools for anyone who may enjoy that alternative over the tables and booths, but it was the scent of the place I loved almost as much as the atmosphere. The various brands and types of alcohol combined with the aroma of whatever dishes were being prepared in the kitchen immediately inspired my mouth to water every time I entered. On weekends, there would be live music performed on a raised platform near the front of the building. I'd spent many evenings just basking in the ambience of the old building, immersing myself in the music while filling my belly. Perhaps that's why I chose it to be the setting of uncovering my first lead on the mysterious lodge. Of course, it could be nothing more than my empty stomach and desire to share a pint with my new book. Who knows? Before I peeled open the pages, something caught my eye that I hadn't noticed back at the old bookstore. The large, bold red letters against the black backdrop only revealed the title, with no author's name to be seen. I turned it over in search of the inherent image of the writer on the back, but it only matched the front cover. The same ominous log cabin standing alone, the same mist creeping around the sides and through the sparse greenery, the same pristine orb of moonlight shedding its glow upon the almost rickety roof of the building, but nothing else. I flipped open the cover on front and back, seeing only the glossy black dust jacket, with not even a synopsis of the story or stories held within. Even the first chapter, after the brief prologue, was simply labeled Chapter 1. No title, still no author's name, only the relevant information, that this was the beginning. This was where this story starts. I've been here before, you may think, as your eyes trace these words, but you were mistaken. The first line of the prologue read. That caught me off guard at first, as that was almost my exact thought when Rayne Jones spoke of the lodge. To imply that you have been somewhere would suggest that you have left at some point. One does not leave the lodge, not unless there were a reason to. Inside, you may find 1,000 doors, 1,000 perhaps, but none shall lead you to an exit, not without purpose. Oh yes, dear traveler, the lodge is waiting. The lodge is waiting for you. I was almost grateful for the distraction of the waitress setting my chilled pint on the table, assuring me that my fish and chips would be along shortly. It was a strange sensation being so mentally vacant when she walked up. Though I'd only read a handful of sentences, I had been fully immersed in the novel from that first one, something that generally does not happen until a few pages in at least. It was as though she called out from the other side of a dark tunnel when she spoke, even with my gaze fixed on hers. I just smiled back at her, murmuring a simple thank you before attempting to shake my head back to the world around me. When I reached for my delightfully cold beer, I glanced back to the book splayed open on the table, almost feeling my senses being pulled back into its murky depths, my eyes not even meeting the first sentence yet. I slammed it shut, chugged half of my pint in one enthusiastic gulp, and felt my wandering mind return to my cozy surroundings. The familiar scents cascaded my nostrils as though I'd only just entered, rather than having been here close to 15 minutes already. My ears felt like they popped, releasing the thick cloud which had blocked the ambient sounds from reaching their drums. In a strange way, I felt like I'd just sprung back to the surface, having been lost to the depths of the ocean. While every sense was muted, transfixed by what lay before me rather than around, everything returned to its default settings within seconds. After a moment of staring, perplexed at the blank wall of the border between my booth and the next, I found myself giggling at myself. It's another curse of the creative mind, seeing mysteries and trivial things or random objects as pieces of a greater puzzle. And my mother always told me I was too imaginative for my own good. By the time my blissfully scented food arrived, my gut immediately growling its approval, I convinced myself that I was just letting my overactive imagination run wild. It was not unlike those dark nights in my youth, gazing wide-eyed at the cracked-open closet door, convinced that some sinister gaze looked back at me. I continued to steal glances back at the closed book I had since slid to the far left of the table, almost daring it to flip itself back open, but these thoughts only made me chuckle more at my stupidity. Once my delicious meal had completed its relocation from plate to gut, I asked for one last pint for the road. I considered peering back into the pages to my left, but given my more recent exaggerated reactions to trivial things, I thought it best to wait until I was no longer surrounded by others. I couldn't deny that it would be much better to make that return trip with a full belly. After paying the check, preparing to chug down that last quarter of my beer, and getting ready to walk off some of the booze on my stroll back to my car, I felt that bizarre discomfort of being watched. When I looked to my right to see two slender men, one tall and the other slightly less tall, I almost jumped at their seemingly sudden arrival. They both had very similar features: black hair parted on the right, dark brown eyes, a long, thin face. They even wore the same burgundy shirt, buttoned all the way to the top, and black dress pants. When they slid onto the bench on the opposing side of the booth without saying a word, moving with such fluidity it almost felt choreographed, my puzzled gaze just followed them. You guys can have the booth," I said with a nervous chuckle. "I'm headed out anyway, so..." "That's a heavy read, my friend," the taller of the two said in a light yet monotone voice. "Very heavy indeed," his buddy added. Their eyes moved in unison from me to the book and back to me again. I glanced around as if the answer to why these guys thought this was a perfectly average and acceptable way to introduce themselves was just floating around somewhere in the building. Yeah," I said, sliding the book from the table and inching to the edge of the bench. "So, nice to meet you guys and all, but stay," the shorter one said. "Talk with us," the other added. It felt like every word they spoke, as few as there had been so far, was rehearsed, like this was a bit or some silly practical joke. They both looked to be about in their 50s, if I was to guess, but social media inspired people of all ages to act like fools for the sake of viewers. That was my thought at the time, that they had a friend somewhere I couldn't see with their phone recording this bizarre interaction from a distance. "I don't think so," I said, getting to my feet with the four eyes following me. "Another time," one of them said. "Another time, perhaps," echoed from beside him. "Yeah," I replied, already walking to the exit. "Sure thing." I didn't look back as I pushed through the doors, joining passers-by on the busy sidewalk, but as I rounded the corner I could swear I was being followed. I reluctantly turned my head, peering over my shoulder behind me, and inadvertently walking into two women walking side by side in the process. "Dude!" one of them exclaimed as we fought to remain standing. "I'm so sorry, Just watch where the hell you're going, yeah?" They still muttered back and forth as they pushed around me, speaking loudly enough for me to make out what an ignorant asshole I am. Again, I laughed at myself, but as I took another glance back to the path behind me, I saw those two dark-haired men walking side by side in my direction through the crowd. With that, I took off running. Both men were very thin, with nothing physically intimidating about them, but something was incredibly unsettling about them. Whatever the case, I wouldn't look back again as I sped towards my car, turning the 15-minute walk into a 7-minute sprint. I was gasping for breath when I got there, cursing myself for continuing to procrastinate getting in better shape, something that may happen sometime tomorrow, if you get what I'm saying. As soon as I climbed into my car, I sped off the second I turned the key. If nothing else, my racing pulse and stomping feet had burned off those last 2 pints I knocked back, but I wouldn't feel at ease until I was back behind the locked door of my house. I can't say why this experience had me so shaken, but my fingers were still trembling when I fished a fresh beer from the fridge. I popped off the cap and downed half of the cold liquid within, cutting glances back at my front door to assure myself that every lock was sealed. Within around 20 minutes, I had calmed down considerably, almost inspired to laugh again at my stupidity. I flicked on the TV, kicked back in my recliner, and gave a heavy sigh to my otherwise darkened home. By the time another empty beer bottle or two had found its way into my trash can, my head was blissfully light, allowing the bizarre day to fade away beyond my heavy eyelids. I'm not sure when I dozed off in my cozy chair, but when the sound of glass breaking tore me from whatever dream I had been entertaining at the time, my initial fear was that someone had broken into my house. After pulling my revolver from the safe and checking every window and door, I felt the blood sink from my face to my churning stomach when I realized what I'd done. Glancing through my living room window to see the glass spilled around the passenger side door of my car, it didn't take me long to figure out what had happened. I tucked the gun into the back of my pants, brushing aside the imagery of my far younger self playing the part of Magnum P.I., and stepped out into the night. Though I had some residual apprehensions about the dark-haired man having perhaps stuck around to have that talk with me, I knew they achieved what they came here for. When I looked through where the passenger side window used to rest to see only nuggets of safety glass scattered across the seat and not the book I neglected to bring inside, I let out another heavy sigh. Of course, the fact that these unusual individuals went to such lengths to steal the book only made the mystery even more enticing. While I remained pissed at myself for both not reading more of it when I had the chance, as well as leaving the bloody thing in the car, I would forgive myself the following day. When I made a return trip to visit the shop in which I had purchased the mysterious novel, hopeful that the old man may have another copy, I found myself unable to even get close. While the firefighters on the scene seemed to have gotten the blaze under control, the Pleasant Bookshop and several stores on either side would be unlikely to open their charred doors anytime soon. I would find out a few days later that the owner of the shop had been unable to escape the fire, but the employees of the other businesses that fell had been a little more fortunate. Some had received some light burns and a bit of scarring to their lungs, but nothing terminal. I'm thankful for that, at least. Assuming that the men who had broken into my car were responsible for this, I was far more glad that I had neglected to bring the book inside with me the previous night. Shattered window and $30 lost on a stolen book is nothing compared to what lengths these men seem to be willing to go to. Still, with the shop gone, the book gone, and the internet still refusing to grant me anything of worth, I had no more leads to go on. I attempted to track down another copy of the book, but it may as well have never existed according to my search. In a last-ditch effort, I decided that my only option was to go back to the beginning, back to the one who sent me on this damned goose chase in the first place. While I had no way of knowing how often Forensic Jones would end up at Tom's place, it seemed my only shot. It was a late Sunday when I ran into the man again, as I was leaving the bar, having given up for the night. I almost felt like a kid running to the grandfather he hadn't seen in months when I saw him jumping down from the lifted and rusted pickup truck. He seemed so carefree as he strolled towards the building, but something changed the second he saw my face. It was like his dark, tanned flesh turned a whiter shade of pale when I came enthusiastically walking up to him. "Mr. Jones," I said, with my smile momentarily interrupted by the strange expression of dread on the man's face. "Do you remember me?" "Yeah," he said, nodding with a trembling sigh. "I do indeed." "I was hoping we could talk more. I hoped you could tell me more about the lodge." "Yeah, I know. Told you had been there, didn't I? Told you got out, too." You did, yeah. I imagine you know more about it than most, given the circumstances." Reckon I do," he said with a strange expression lining his weathered face. "Ain't everyone gets out, you know. The ones that do, sometimes they gotta make a deal to make it happen. Don't last, though. It's more like a vacation than an escape, I suppose." "Is that right?" I said, beginning to wonder whether this was a huge waste of my time. "They don't tell you when you gotta come back, you know. Just get some cryptic riddle or some shit. Maybe something like, the second time you see the one you introduced me to, The time has come for you to return to me. Something crazy sounded and all mysterious like. Yeah, that certainly does sound cryptic. So, can I buy you a drink? Maybe we can talk about it. Sure thing, buddy, he said with a weary smile. How about I buy the first round this time? As we walked back to the entrance to the bar, Jonesy stopped in place, staring at the door some 10 feet ahead. Hey, do me a favor, will you? He said, not shifting his gaze from the path ahead. Fetch my jacket from the truck. It's likely to be a chilly night, and my knees is hurting pretty good. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, friend, he said, tossing me the keys. I jogged over to the black truck near the back of the parking lot, pulled the dusty denim jacket from the already unlocked passenger side, and turned back to the bar ahead. Jonesy was just standing in front of the door, seemingly staring at it. It was as though he was mulling over whether or not to enter. Of course, it could have been nothing more than him waiting for me. That's what I thought anyway, before he reached out with his visibly trembling hand, pulling the door before him open. My swift stroll slowed down a good deal when I saw the slender man silhouetted by a vibrant red glow from within the bar. Given that the lighting inside was generally a fairly average warm illumination, no different from many bars I'd visited throughout my life, I was quite perplexed by the sight. As I drew closer, Firenze stepped inside, turned back to face me, his eyes shimmering and glassy, accentuated by the scarlet aura. I really am sorry, partner, he said before the door slammed shut, seemingly of its own accord. As the strange idea that I would never see the odd little man again struck me, I left it off and continued my walk to meet him at the bar. When I pulled open the door to see its light having reverted to its normal average hue with no trace of the man I followed inside, I had to assume that he'd perhaps headed to the bathroom. Maybe he'd changed his mind about covering that first round after all, hiding away until I footed the bill. When I reclaimed the table I had left only minutes before, time seemed to trickle by as I awaited Jonesy's return. After a time, I strolled to the facilities to see only an older man leaning up against the wall attempting to guide his stream straight into the urinal. Still refusing to accept something I could barely fathom to be a possibility, I approached the bar to ask Jane if she'd seen where Jonesy got off to. Jonesy? She said, screwing up her face as though this was an outlandish question. I don't know no Jonesy. Firenze Jones, I insisted. Short, skinny, good old boy type, talks a lot, done everything and seen everything. You know, Jonesy. The still puzzled Mrs. Colby glanced at a couple of the regulars sitting at the bar, each of whom returned a bewildered shrug. I continued my hopeless inquiry, refusing to accept the only facts anyone had to give. When I finally gave up and returned to my home, I still couldn't wrap my mind around not only the vanishing act he pulled off, but how nobody even seemed to know he existed. His truck still sits at the back of that parking lot. Jane has talked about getting it towed, even after I gave her the keys I held onto in the hopes of returning them to their owner. She's considered just parking it around back just in case this mysterious man she's never met comes to claim them, but I get the feeling she can't bring herself to move it. I think that somewhere deep inside she does recall the man whose endless rambling would drive her nuts. I hope she does anyway. Honestly, I'm beginning to wonder if I'm the crazy one. Whatever the case, if I'm losing my shit, inventing people who were never real, I have to find some answers about this mysterious lodge. While I hope to never run across those oddballs who smashed in the window of my passenger side door, I just know they're connected to it in some way. The Lodge is Waiting, the book was titled. One way or another, I'm gonna find out what or who it's waiting for. Even if it's waiting for me.